Center for Commercial Law Study, Center for Commercial Law Studies, Queen Mary University of London, in particular by the Alumni Association from 3 different countries, Indonesia, India, and Turkey. So today's webinar title is Misogyny, the Internet and Media as a Double-Edged Sword. So this is very interesting. In this webinar, my name is Aisha. I'm from the Indonesia. Will be the host of today's webinar event. This webinar will consist of 2 big sessions. The first session will be started by, of course, the opening by me, and then later by the first moderator, Dr. Tia Kao, then followed by the presentations from 2 speakers separately. Each of them will have 15 to 20 minutes to do the presentation, and then the participants, the attendees, can have a quick Q&A session after these 2 speakers finish with the presentation. However, you are all also welcome to raise questions throughout the whole session in the chat room before even the session begins. So, and then the second session will be started after the Q&A of the first session is finished and the transition of each session. And then the second moderator, Dr. Sezen Izik from Turkey, with similar format where 2 speakers also will do the presentation separately and then followed by Q&A session. Without further ado, I will continue by introducing our moderator for this event, Dr. Tian Ruo Kao. I'm sorry if I pronounce his name incorrectly. And then the Q&A session, our moderator will be the organization of this event. So, Dr. Tia Kao, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Aisha. Before we dive into today's presentation, please allow me, on behalf of the CCLS Joint Chapter Events Organizer and the Steering Committee, to take a few minutes and thank everyone who contribute to the success of this event. I will start by thanking our distinguished guest speaker, Miss Ayu Mawarini from Mahendra & Co. Law Firm, Ms. Natasha Bali from Zeus IP Advocates LLP. We also have Ms. Ina Polyakova from Novi Nano Limited. And finally, Mr. Fidaus from the University of Barcelona. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your thoughts, and your experience with all of us today at this event. We would also like to say thank you to Dr. Sezam Kamal Izik from Istanbul Medeniyet University as my moderator partner for this event. We also have Mrs. Aisha Alamanda from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia as the host of this event. We got Ms. Katerina Taylor Bennett and Ms. Celia Blakeway Phillips from the CCLS Alumni and Development Team in London, kindly provided us with the technical and promotional assistance of this event. We would like to show our gratitude to our colleagues at the CCLS Committee Indonesia chapters, including Mr. Fidaus as the initiator and the lead project of this event. We got Mr. Muhammad Iqbal Pratama for the e-flyers and this beautiful Zoom background here. Ms. Ayu Mawarini for the promotional assistance, and the rest of the member of the CCLS Committee Indonesian chapters and CCLS Indonesian community. The same gratitude also goes to the CCLS India and Italy chapters. We would like to thank our colleagues such as Mr. Ajit Mishra, Ms. Ravisha Gupta, I'm sorry, and Mrs. Shubhanagi Roktagi from the India chapter. We got Mr. Luca Ottiero from CCLS Italy chapter for finding and approving the speakers for this event, as well as his promotional assistant. Miss Priscilla Robledo helped us finalize the title of this event. And we also like to appreciate Miss Christina Cosi for her attention to contribute. She was supposed to be one of the speakers today from Italy, but unfortunately she can't make it today because of emergency work. Right now, as I speak, she's having an important meeting with the Bank of Italy at Rome. And last but not least, we appreciate all the participants today who kindly allocate time to be here. Well, a good event is determined not only by the topics, not only by the speaker or the organizer, but also the presence of all of you here. As people often say, the more the merrier. As we know, women have been a crucial part of human civilization since we exist. Yet the issue of how women is treated, issues like misogyny, is still happening. So before we continue, we should ask ourselves, what is misogyny? Oh, sorry, misogyny. And from many definitions of misogyny that we can find, I will just pick one from the Cambridge Dictionary. Misogyny is the feeling of hating women or the belief that men are much better than women. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, the trend of misogynist content is rising, which sparks more concern about women's safety, human rights in both online and offline contexts. Therefore, on this occasion, the CCLS Alumni Chapter, India, Indonesia, and Italy decide to organize this webinar on the topic misogyny, the internet and media as a double-edged sword, as part of our contribution to the society. In particular, to educate and to raise awareness, as well as giving recommendations to the current law and policymakers to how to solve this ongoing issue. So let's begin. For the first half of today's event, we'll have two speakers. Each speaker will have roughly 15 to 20 minutes to speak, and then we'll have the Q&A section. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat while they are presenting. And once they completed the presentation, we'll have the round of questions. Our first speaker today is Ms. Ayu Mawarini. Ayu is an alumna of the School of International Arbitration, Queen Mary, University of London. She completed her LLM in 2020, specializing in international disputes resolution. Currently, Ayu works as a lawyer at Mahendra & Co. law firm, handling domestic and global clients in corporate business, construction, employment law, and international property rights, including matters related to patent, trademarks, and industrial designs. Ayu also has a particular interest in technological issues such as cybersecurity, followed by her dissertation uprising the topic, the duty of ensuring cybersecurity in international commercial arbitration for her master's study. She is now engaging with a project related to data protection, privacy, and compliance to advise clients about the recent Indonesian data protection law. Today, Ayu is going to talk about online misogyny from an Indonesian perspective. Ayu, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tia, and thank you, Aisyah, for introduction, and for Tia for introducing me. Well, thank you also for the CCLS Queen Mary University of London for giving me the opportunity as one of the speakers of this event. It is a very delightful opportunity for me. So today, I will share the screen first for the topic that I will share. Hang on. Okay, can everyone see my screen right now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So today, I will talk about the first topic on online misogyny from the Indonesia perspective. And before we jump to the main topic of this webinar, I will highlight some of the key points that we will talk in my presentation. The first one is that we will learn about the law, regulations, and policy that applied in Indonesia for the online misogyny. And we will talk about the current trend and what is the ongoing behavior on online misogyny, and also what is the background that shaped the society in Indonesian society. to see the perspective of online misogyny. So if we talk about the online misogyny or the overall misogyny in Indonesia, we are talking about the historical viewpoints, and the historical viewpoints itself has the connection with the culture and then geographical history in Indonesia, because Indonesia has thousands of islands, and each island actually has their own ethnics, and we have here 1,340 ethnics in Indonesia, and each ethnics bring their own culture, which means the culture itself shapes the society, including how they see the women, and creates the ethnicity's identity. Well, if I could give the example, I'm coming from the Javanese tribe, one of the ethnic in Indonesia, one of the majority ethnic in Indonesia. Well, in Javanese, I would say that there's a significant role in marriage for Javanese people, and we call it as the patriarchy, although it is not very apparent, but it is a culture that we already understand since we were born, that the patriarchy, it is in our side. And the patriarchy in Javanese people, it applies for example, the household, education, and the social attitude. And we have the unwritten rules of cook, reproduce, make up, and dress up. And for example, the household, we have the belief, although it is not the written rules, but it is very much unwritten. We see the women as a housewife that usually cook, reproduce, and make up for the husband and dress up for the husband. And of course, for the social attitude, we still have the tendency that the women shall stay at home to provide the enjoyment for a man. And that is one of the example that applied in Javanese people. But of course, it could not be generalized because we are coming from different backgrounds and we have a lot of ethnics. It's just one of the example that the culture shapes the society, and it applies in Javanese people. But in the process, we have the reformation and progression. We call it as the women's emancipation. We have the role model, Era Kartini. We call her name as Kartini, and through the historical viewpoints, Kartini brings the women's emancipation in Indonesia, and it changed the perception that that women should still could do the education, even pursue the education in higher education. And through that point, we also have the progression that we see in the progress, that the career itself, we could pursue our career whatever we likes. And that is the reformation and progression that's coming in from Indonesia. We call it the women's emancipation by Era Kartini. And right now, misogyny in Indonesia is no longer attached to the tribes, but in my viewpoints, it is focusing on the women behavior in the society. So the women behavior in the society is like surveilled by the society itself, and then the society decides whether they are doing the right way or the wrong way as women. And through that point, we could understand that the misogyny progress not only from the culture, but to the women behavior in the society. We have several key issues that applied in Indonesia. We are talking about misogyny, about the hate towards women, but the hate itself could involve in several actions, that not only through non-verbal actions, but also verbally. One of which is like the prejudice on women roles in a family. We currently have the trend of discussing whether a woman should pursue the career, and we call it as the career women, instead of being a housewife. And that kind of roles is still confusing in this society. And of course, in my viewpoints, there is nothing wrong with that, because we could pursue anything that we want as a woman. And the other key issue is that there's identification that women as a sexual object, and it is worsened by the media framing of using sexist words to attract readers, and then sexual harassment, exploitation, or even gender-based domestic violence. The gender-based domestic violence is one of the real example, and that is still increasing, that's happening in a marriage. And then we have the data here about the misogyny. This is the data of offline misogyny, not the online misogyny. And it is coming from the Indonesian National Commission on Violence Against Women, the association coming from the government, from human rights. And we have the misogyny in a private level that is quite individual and personal, and also the public level. But in private level, the misogyny in Indonesian society focusing more, and we have 44% of mental violence and then sexual violence. So if we are talking about misogyny, not many people understand the concept of misogyny, but it integrates into several actions that is quite familiar in the society. But in public level, we have, interestingly, 69% misogyny on cyber, and it involves with many cases like sexual harassment, online sexual harassment, or online bullying that involve the gender-based violence. Interestingly, again, we have the highlighted cases in Indonesia, one of which we have 3 cases here and one Harry Wirawan case. It is already judged in it's already judged in litigation process. Although it is the example of serial child rape in an Islamic institution by the teacher to 13 female students in Bandung, Indonesia. But what I want to highlight in here is that not the sexual assault itself, but we are focusing on the actions toward a group of female students, and we understand that it involves the superiority and also the prejudice that women shall be under the women, shall under the man. And the next case, we have the Arawinda case and Gofar Hilman case, and these 2 cases is not actually going through the litigation process, but it is a viral case. But please, this is not under litigation process, so I give some note in here. The Arawinda case, we have women behavior that I mentioned before, the infidelity that involved with the influencer that creates the society to hate a particular person because of the women behavior in the society. Like they are throwing hatred, online bullying rapidly, even until now, to a particular person because of the infidelity that she involved. And it creates the levels of relationship destroyer, or in Indonesia, we call it as pelakor. And this kind of label, we could see as one of the mostly gender associated. And if we call it as the relationship destroyer, people in Indonesia will then refer to, oh, that means women. So that kind of thing, I think that is quite a grow in Indonesia. And we have the Gofar Hilman case. This is the viral case on an influencer as well that prove his masculinity by stating that he conquering nearly 100 of women sexually. And I think through these 3 points, we could understand that this kind of acts, although it is not judged already by law, but this could be the example of the online misogyny that is still growing in the Indonesian society. It's coming through the behavior of women and how a man see the women itself. So the cyber misogyny, in my opinion, I think it's has the relation with the online harassment, online catcalling, and it involved with a certain action like standardizing certain actions, physical appearance for women as a bare minimum, stereotyping, and then spamming, threat, and give the threat post-separation abuse. In Indonesia, is misogyny a crime? We could not say the misogyny as a crime, but in Indonesia, we understand misogyny as the idea and concept. So we have to break down it in certain actions to be identified as part of the violation against certain unlawful acts. And the misogyny itself is a concept that shaped the hatred against the women. In Indonesia, we don't have the law that stating misogyny as an unlawful act, but we have certain actions set out by the government that this could bring the discrimination and could be criminalized. In Indonesia, we have the international instruments to protect in a regular viewpoints. We have Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then ICCPR, and then ILO Convention for the Employment, and ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Person. But interestingly, we have the Convention on the Political Rights in Women, 1953. We have the quote here: women shall have the right to vote in all elections on the same terms as men without any discrimination. And it's stating that the discrimination toward women is not allowed, and the government recognized that women in a political viewpoint shall have the equal treatment. And for now, we have in a national stage, the main law that we apply here is the Constitution of the Republic Indonesia. We could see that this is the top level. We have to prioritize this law first instead of the other kind of laws, because this is the Constitution of Republic Indonesia, and it recognizes that every person, we are using every person here, it doesn't matter the gender, we are using every person, that every person shall have the right to protect of his or herself, family, honor, dignity, and receive protection from the threat of fear, and then to be free from discriminative treatment based upon any grounds whatsoever, and shall have the right to protection from any discriminative treatment. And this is the ground rules in Indonesia. From the Constitution itself, it is then growing up into several laws and regulation. And we have several laws here that I think it applied to the topic of this webinar. We have the Indonesian Criminal Code, and then the special one like the sexual violence crime, and then employment law, pornography law, and interestingly, we have the electronic information and transactions, because it involved with the online platform, and then the marriage. So here we have the highlighted rules in relation to the eradication of misogyny. I will jump up to the online platform usage. On online platform usage, we have Electronic Information and Technology Law, IT law. In here, it is stated that if we share an information that create or inflicting hatred, dissensions on individuals or certain groups of community based on ethnic groups, religion, races, and intergroups that could violate the decency or charge of insult, extortion, threats, or defamation, it could be criminalized under this law. And if we see that if we use the online media it will apply to this rule, because the misogyny itself will talk about something online. In here, if we targeting individual, especially based on the gender, and if the victim itself could report to the institution, so the suspected could be charged under this law. We in Indonesia, we don't have the misogyny law in a special case, but we have this kind of regulation on hate speech, and it is under Indonesian Criminal Code and under the Electronic Information and Technology Law, and it is talking about the 5 kind of groups. There are 5 factors that could be identified as the hate speech. It is coming from ethnic, gender, disability groups, religion, and belief. So that way, if we have the online misogyny or any violation on the women's right because of the female gender, we could use the hate speech, because under this law, if we put hate speech toward women, and it is one part of the misogyny that we are talking, then it could be criminalized under this law. For example, like if we declare hatred and then we express hatred by writing, painting in public, or deliberately showing hatred by racial or discrimination, it could be imprisoned under 4 until 5 years.
Sorry to interrupt, Ayu. You have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you so much, Tia. What have been done in Indonesia? In Indonesia, we already have the Basic of Law and Regulation Establishment, and we have the establishment of institution, NGO, and it is quite massive. And the government itself has the active forum group discussion coming from the ministry, and we have the broadcast institution as well that is concerning about the women. And if we are talking about the recommendation that Indonesian government should give to combat the misogyny itself, I think I would go for redesigning the public and online space, so it could the government could surveil more of the spreading misogyny ideology on an online platform. And the government should utilize technology more to surveil the online misogyny itself. And most importantly, I think the government should create the safe leading media, because mass media utilization is used as the social control, and usually it provides the journalism that only create the attractiveness to the readers. And in my opinion, we should encouraging journalism to provide not only information to share, but more analysis, so we could discuss more in what right and what wrongs in the society, to be more critical towards the society's occurrence, one of which is the misogyny. And the last one, it's still the environment. We have the safe and comfort workplace. I think it is better for the government to concern more about the women's right in employment, especially, for example, like establishing credit scoring in the workplace as the standard and the requirement, so the company's compliance could be surveilled. Either the company has already protected the women's employee or not. And of course, there are many things that that could give in this topic, but in my opinion, overall, there are many things that can still be improved by the government, and we have to be one step forward from anything the government itself, because the spread of online misogyny, it is a very easy, and we should create the environment that is safe for women, either in offline and also in online, including the media. I think that's all coming from me for my topic, online misogyny in Indonesia. Thank you, everyone, and I will go to Tia.
Thank you. Thank you, Ayu. Well, really interesting. And I already have two questions that I want to raise with you. But I will save it for later because now we have Natasha. So Natasha completed her LLB from ILS Law College in Pune and graduated in the year of 2012. During her 5 years at college, she also obtained a diploma at corporate law and completed a training program in alternative dispute resolution at ILS Law College. She also obtained a diploma in intellectual property rights and an online diploma in e-commerce law from Asian School of Cyber Law, Pune. Natasha commenced her legal career with a corporate law firm in 2012 and joined Zeus IP Advocates LLP in a boutique intellectual property law firm based in Delhi, NCR. In the year 2013, that was in the year of 2013. And in the last 10 years, she rose to the rank from a junior associate to a partner at the firm. She has helped clients ranging from individuals to small businesses to unicorn and Fortune 500 companies, safeguarding and enforcing their intellectual property whilst keeping infringers at bay. So today, Natasha is going to explore the topic, misogyny, is there light at the end of the dark tunnel? Let's welcome Natasha.
Thank you so much, Tia. It's a pleasure to be a part of this distinguished panel. And I will straight away dive into my presentation. Let me just quickly share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, perfect. So my topic for the day is misogyny, is there light at the end of this dark tunnel? And I'm going to walk you through the Indian perspective. Now, before I start with the presentation, I just want to share an anecdote. A couple of years back, I visited the Guinness Brewery in Ireland, and I saw the iconic fish on a bicycle, which I'm sure a lot of you would have seen. It comes with the slogan that was released in 1996 that says, "A man needs a woman like a fish needs a bicycle." Now, the moment I read that, two thoughts dawned upon me. One, the slogan came at a time when majority of the women in India were conditioned to be dependent on male counterparts. And the second, that the slogan features in a brewery, and a place with alcohol was considered to be a prohibited place for women in India. So, I just looked at that slogan and I said, oh my God, there are places that were thinking of women in 1996. But was this always the case or the status for women in India? Well, not. And I would like to take you through the different eras in India. So let me start from the very beginning, which is called Prarambh in Hindi. As per the Hindu Puranas or the literature, there are three primary male gods. One who is the creator, called the Brahma, the administrator, called the Vishnu, and the destroyer, called the Mahesh or Shiv. Very few people know that the leader or the mother of these three male gods is a goddess or a female consort called Devi. Now, very few people know this because this isn't a part of the society today. But the mother of these three gods identifies or shows that from the very start, women were considered the epitome or the creator of the world. This can also be seen through the Vedic period, which was considered to be a more egalitarian society than before, in terms of the status and position of women, which was considered equal. A lot of Vedic ceremonies were incomplete if they didn't have the woman sitting right beside to the man. A greater role for women was carved out than just being a mother. And women had the right to decide their partner. And there were ages stipulated beyond which they can marry. So 16 was the limit that was set for them, before which the woman would not marry. So these were terms, or these were the way of life for women when the world just began in India. We saw downhill in the medieval era, which is where the onset of the dark phase commenced. This was primarily noticed because of the foreign invasion, which saw and brought in new cultures, new ideologies, and women from being the goddesses or the leaders of the tribe were soon you noticed to be properties of their male counterparts, be it their father, their brother, or their husband. Their free will to decide their own partner, to go and get educated, to marry after age of 16 when they hit puberty, were all taken away from them. They were discouraged from being educated. And a lot of other practices came in, such as the practice of sati, where women had to sit on the pyre as soon as the male husband was, died. So the women also had to give up their life. There were child marriages. Widows were prohibited to remarry. And there was the parda system, wherein the women had to wear a veil. They weren't allowed to disclose or show their face to the men in the society. Cut to the modern era. Now, modern era, I have divided into pre-independence and post-independence. Now, in the pre-independence era, while misogyny had penetrated deeper into the society, there were a few welcoming changes that were noticed. There was birth of women leaders who fought right next to the male counterparts. There are a lot of women freedom fighters, because of which we managed to get freedom for India. Laws to prevent oppression were introduced, such as the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act came in, the Child Marriage Restraint Act came in, and the abolition of sati, the practice that I just mentioned before. There were also impetus given to women now learning skills, which would enhance their capabilities. So handicrafts was one such thing. Martial arts was also something that was promoted. Post-independence, we saw that the concept of equality was finally introduced in the Indian Constitution. And the National Commission of Women was set up. Women also had voting rights from the get-go, which is a brilliant thing that came in with the independence. So women in India never had to fight for voting rights. I would now like to move to the era of advertisements, media, and internet, which is the real convoluted period. Here, the freedom of speech is used as a weapon to battle misogynistic mindset and comments. And anonymity, while it helps in upholding the right to privacy, it unfortunately has repercussions in combating online crimes, especially against women. I have picked out a few advertisements just to show the progression from the time where Van Heusen, a huge brand, used to think that a pretty picture is painted when you drop to a man's knees, to another Indian brand called Usha, where women were trained to be ideal housewives because that is the only role that people or men thought that women could fulfill. Interestingly, Usha is a name of a woman in India. And I wonder why a company like Usha would actually downplay the women in the society, but well, it is what it is. I have also included the poster of the quote or the slogan that I shared in the beginning of the slide. And it's my personal favorite. Now, I would like to take to the last picture that I've included, which is a very recent advertisement by Ariel. It is talking about men sharing the load of women. And this is the progression chart from what it used to be to a slight change that we have noticed. Is it sufficient? Well, no. But are we on the right path? I would say, yeah. I mean, we are taking baby steps. Interesting bit in the presentation. Impact of Bollywood on misogyny. Now, many of you would know that Bollywood and Indian culture is closely related. And Bollywood has a huge impact on the mindset of the people in India. It is in a lot of ways reflective of what people think in India and how the society is. When in the beginning movies were introduced, they were a byproduct of patriarchy because women were shown in a subservient role. They were dependent on men. They were just shown circling around the whims and fancies of men. They would be objectified. The lyrics that was used was also primarily targeting women and objectifying them. Strangely, stalking was shown as a positive. So there are a lot of famous blockbuster hit movies in India, all showing men in the name of true passion and love, stalking women. And that was considered absolutely okay. And we cheered and applauded these heroes for the longest time. It is only recently, with the advent of social media and internet, that you see people actually calling out film stars or directors or producers who have these misogynistic narratives or plots. A very recent example is of 2019, a movie called Kabir Singh, which was primarily centric around a man who used to think he's the be-all and end-all of it. And he ill-treated the woman. He thought that he owned the woman and she's her property. There were a lot of misogynistic lines and plots, and this was called out by many people. How social media platform has helped actresses and people in the Bollywood is because it has given them a platform to talk about topics like lack of equal pay. They aren't treated equally in the industry. Ageism is being talked about, and body shaming. Well, the noises are now at least heard by a lot of people. Before social media, I don't even think there was a platform that existed. So a little chatter from people who have millions and billions of followers does help to some extent to come to the rescue of women who don't have that kind of a platform. So the new era of movies has seen a significant change, with women having leading roles, getting better remuneration structure. But unfortunately, we haven't reached a point where I would say that we are free from misogynists in the society. I have a photo, the photo number 2, which shows the box office review of the movie Kabir Singh that I just mentioned, a complete misogynistic plot, versus a movie called Thappad, where a woman leads the movie, and it's a complete feminist point of view. If you see the box office revenue, in itself evidences the fact that people haven't accepted women as leaders. It's sad, but I mean, social media would help in the long run to bring out these glaring statistics and hopefully change the narrative. I am going to now talk about a few landmark cases and instances in India, taking you back to 1997, which is the case of Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan. Why this is important is because it is the first case that kind of set these guidelines or directions for sexual harassment faced by women in a work environment. There are a set of guidelines that employers are supposed to follow to ensure that women in their workplace are safe and secure. The second case is of 2004, which is Suhas Katti versus Tamil Nadu. This is the first case that was filed, or the first complaint that was filed under the Information Technology Act. It is a case which sets a benchmark in cyber harassing issue. And the verdict came in 7 months, 7 or 9 months, something, a small period like that, which is substantial because cases in India take forever. Here, the victim was being harassed by the accused as she refused to marry the latter. So the accused kept sending defamatory and obscene messages to her online, against which she finally filed a complaint, and the accused was convicted for defaming and outraging the modesty of a woman. There's also a judgment that came in recently in 2022, where the Supreme Court of India allowed unmarried women to abort a pregnancy up to 24 weeks as opposed to 20 weeks earlier. Why I mentioned this is just to let you know that after all these struggles, finally, the men realized that a woman has a free will and free right to her own body, irrespective of the marital status, irrespective of the fact whether she has a male counterpart with her or not. It is her body, it is her right, and that has been recognized. There is also another case called the Bully Bai Act, which is of 2022, again, very recent. It is about online mock auction of Muslim women in India. Photos of prominent Muslim journalists and social workers, students, and famous personalities were uploaded on an app without their permission, of course. And these were auctioned virtually. One of the journalists filed an FIR, which is a first information report. A criminal complaint was registered and the cyber cell commenced investigation, pursuant to which 4 accused were arrested. While the matter is sub judice, there is the arrest comes in as a welcoming change. The last on the list for these landmark cases is about a social media influencer that recently called out a fashion designer for body shaming. Now, this is an interesting one because this isn't registered anywhere. It is purely on the social media. There is a social media influencer who wanted to purchase her wedding dress, and that is a big deal in India. People wait for their weddings for quite some time, and women are particularly interested in getting a particular kind of dress for their wedding. And with that dream, this girl entered a prominent fashion designer store, and she received unwelcoming and extremely unfavorable conduct from the salesperson. She received negative comments for being a plus size woman. She received comments about not having the size that she wears. And the size was never disclosed by the woman, but it was in fact disclosed without her permission in a so-called apology note by the fashion designer. So, I mean, at least with the kind of followers the influencer had, she ensured that this message of body shaming reaches to the masses, and people and women recognize that this needs to stop, irrespective of who is leading it, whether it is a famous fashion designer or the likes of it. They need to stop if they're targeting a woman. What has the government done to step in? The government has, they have a lot of schemes in place. The Ministry of Women and Child Development has commissions that they have established. The National Commission of Women has been active since 1990. The National Policy for the Women Empowerment came in 2001. There are a bunch of schemes such as encouraging women or girls to study. Women helpline schemes have been started, and a bunch of other schemes that are in place, which is giving a platform to a woman to raise complaints if she faces any sort of crime, whether it is on a traditional platform, physical platform, or on an online platform. There are schemes to promote education for the betterment of a woman's life. There are schemes in place or policies in place to ensure that a woman feels safe, whether she's on the street, in office, or any other surrounding. There are directions and think tanks that have been set up to ensure that policies are made that are aligned to women's safety. Well, while there is a lot happening, there is still a lot of misogyny that one can notice. So like I said, there is the right noise, but I don't think we are really hitting the pain point yet. So it's work in progress, I would say. Just taking you through a few legal provisions that exist in India to battle misogyny and online misogyny in particular. There is the Information Technology Act. I have listed down a few sections which kind of protect crimes like tampering with evidence or identity theft, misrepresentation, privacy breach or confidentiality breach. There is also the Indian Penal Code that lists out crimes and their penalties for sending threatening messages, defamatory messages, forgery, bogus websites, etc. There is also a cybercrime reporting portal which has been set up where women can register complaints against any crimes that they have encountered or online content which needs to be reported. Very recently, an advisory on functioning of matrimonial sites was also issued because there is a lot of misrepresentation of facts there. People disguise themselves or put out wrong information to attract better prospects, so to say. And to kind of curtail that wrong information, there have been guidelines that have been set out and that these intermediaries need to strictly follow. There are cyber forensics and training labs that have been set up, which kind of they solely and wholly focus on collection, preservation, and seizing of electronic evidence and dealing with cyber crime. And members are trained in this forensic training lab. All that said, there are still a lot of challenges that we face. In my view, they are the following. One, there is still lack of training to investigate cybercrimes. Cybercrimes are nuanced crimes. They can't be considered as equal to traditional crimes or physical crimes, because internet is a faceless world. I mean, there are a lot of people that function behind anonymity, and it is difficult.
Sorry to interrupt. You have about 2 minutes left.
Thank you. So it is difficult to investigate these cybercrimes, which means that a lot of training is required. The cybercrimes right now, they don't have the proper equipment, because of which investigations are delayed. There is fear amongst the women that is noticed, or lack of awareness in reporting crime. So while there are platforms, the complaints that are registered aren't plentiful. The transcendental nature of the internet, which I just mentioned above, it is difficult. It makes it difficult to pinpoint who the culprit is. There is lack of targeted and specific laws to keep up with the change in technology. So the technology is growing at a massive speed. We've reached metaverse, but the laws that we haven't kept up yet. The punishments aren't hard enough. I don't think 2 years is sufficient for somebody who's behind a crime that is as grave as targeting a woman in any way. There is also deeper assistance that I personally feel is missing from intermediaries. Critical information does not reach cyber crimes. For example, when IP addresses are asked for, intermediaries often fail to report that, which delays and derails the investigations. So these are a few challenges that we face. And my 2 cents on the way forward are, one, creating awareness. The louder we create a noise, the louder we reach to the people, it would be more effective. People, and women especially, have to be educated. They need to know that there has to be awareness for them to actually realize what is happening. A lot of women who use social media in India do not have an idea of how it really functions. I speak to a lot of women in my own family, and they're just there to catch up with their friends, but they really don't know what are the features. How can they report a crime? How can you report an abuse? They don't know that. So these awareness steps need to be initiated, because a crime against a woman affects every bit of her reputation, her life, mental health, on both online and offline. Social media is also available to children with an impressionable mind. And there has to be mindful conditioning from the parents, because they have free access to internet. And what you teach at home is the conditioning that the child grows with. So the conditioning needs to change. The narrative needs to change. You need to tell them that it is not okay to hurt a woman, and it is okay for a man to be dependent on a woman. That's okay. So the conditioning needs to change. There has to be stricter training for law enforcement bodies. That is a mandate. Speaking to women in diverse groups and coordinating with women-led oriented organizations to actually collect data set of crimes that has happened or experienced by women. I feel like we get these data sets from a lot of source points, but not majority being women. And what better than to hear it from the horse's mouth? I feel we would get better resolutions. There has to be stricter penalties, fast track processes, and specific laws. Social media, like I mentioned, the platform needs to be more robust. There has to be expedited process and possibly redressal in languages, local languages, because India has many of them. And people from different regions may not understand Hindi and English. The account holder information could be redacted for privacy, but needs to be shared at the right time with the law enforcement bodies. And last but not the least on my list, censor boards who are actually screening movies or certifying movies. They need to check the quality of these movies, what the actor and actresses and the lyrics of the movie speak, whether they are demeaning the women. And if they are, that needs to be checked. That movie should not get a clearance. The age appropriateness should not be looked at. The content needs to be looked at. So that brings me to the very end of my presentation. And I'm hopeful that with these few changes, it brings us a little closer to an egalitarian society. Whatever era or condition, I personally feel you can never bring down a determined or a tenacious woman. All we need to do is just rekindle that spark in all of us and remember that we have the courage to fight against all odds. If we recognize that and become our own voice, I think we can uproot this menace of misogyny. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
And
very
sorry,
much.
Tia, for exceeding my time.
It's okay. I see that you're on the last few points, so I was like, let's just keep you running. Thank you very much, Natasha. Now, questions. I can see one already. So for both presenters from Indonesia and India, the first question you have is, do you think misogyny is a symbol of act on how competitive men can be towards women?
I can take that if I, or Ayu, do you want to share
I don't
your
mind. Who wants to go first?
Natasha, you can go first. Go on.
Okay. Well, I don't know competitive, but it definitely is hatred towards women. So the baseline is hatred, and then it builds on that. So competitive may be the next layer. And I don't know why the hatred comes or where it comes from, but perhaps conditioning. Because I just feel that men have been told to behave in a certain way against women. Men have been probably conditioned to believe that they are superior to women. So whenever they see a woman climbing up the ladder or going up the ranks, they feel that that's not their place and they need to pull them down. And that is where the competitive spirit probably creeps in.
And what do you think, Ayu, for this particular question?
Yeah, if we are talking about this, whether misogyny is a symbol of act on how competitive men could be towards women, I think it is yes, because those who see it as a threat, it's actually unconsciously gather more opinion to receive validation. So what I mean is that it is coming to the society that think that if a woman is being more ambitious or to want more in their career, some of the people will think it as a threat. And I think if they think that way, it could unconsciously gather more opinion and then invite others to receive more validation on it. And I think their position, they think that their position is at stake, but the thing is, we want to be we want women to be seen as a person, as an individual at the first place, not as a competitive individual. And we have to enjoy similar rights, and thanks to the HR Convention and the basic fundamental rights. And I think being discriminative in many ways, especially in any way, either in career or in society, I think should be diminished.
I actually have a quite interesting theory, and this kind of popped into my head after I had my child. I think the misogyny, in a way, that it can come from insecureness. I don't know if any of you agree with me, but I feel that a woman can make sure their child is their child, but a man cannot. And just as like part of the animal nature or human nature, then every creature in this world, living creature, will want to pass on their gene, and they will naturally want to control and secure that their gene is passed on. And in a way that this is men trying to control their offspring, and through controlling women, and it comes from their insecureness of not having a child that is theirs. But that is really just my personal take on it. Right, we have a next question. So do you think online misogyny is more dangerous than traditional offline misogyny? I think some of you already touched on it and say that it's more difficult to tackle, it's more difficult to police. But do you think in nature that this is like more dangerous, and why?
Yeah, if I could answer for this one, I think, yeah, it is undoubtedly more dangerous than the offline misogyny because of the spread and the control that the government has to face in the recent work on, or in the future that we are not know. We don't know whether the technology will bring us to many societies occurrence, especially if it is worsened by media. And since everything is online right now, we are seeing the like the media in Indonesia, especially, they provide that kind of journalism that they want the readers to read. So they often give the mislead articles just to attract the readers. But the thing is, I think it's not entirely dangerous, because if it is online, we could see everyone's perspective, and it often happen in Indonesia. If there are a particular viral case on anything about the social occurrence, we actually could learn from each other, like others' perspective enlighten us to see about a particular issue, and we are being objective. We could see everyone's perspective in online platform. But the thing is, we have to use it very wisely, I think. So if we are talking whether online messaging is more dangerous for the control, I would say yes, but it's not entirely dangerous, because through that point we could learn from each other, in which we could not learn from the offline misogyny.
Thank you. And you mentioned about like online content, right? And this reminds us, many people will argue that if you banned or censored the controversial contents, then it's against the freedom of expression. So our next question, is it urgent to have law and regulations which specifically tackles misogyny, or this will be an issue against free speech?
Natasha, you want to jump to that one?
Sure. So this has to be done delicately, because you can't, trample on somebody else's freedom of speech. But at the same time, I don't think that you can also violate somebody's rights or somebody's reputation. So laws have to be seen from a very crime perspective, and from a very defamation perspective. That if this is something that is going to defame a woman, it is going to have an impact on her reputation, on her mental health, on the way if it makes her feel insecure. If these are the end products of a statement or of a conduct or of a narrative, then the law should target that. So it is really the intention. One can say anything, yes, it's a free world, but you can't really put down someone else. And that has always been the principle of defamation. We have that as a law in most countries. So it is essentially a replication of the same thing in a tighter and a stricter way to target hateful speeches against women. So, that's what I feel.
Yeah, if I could add, from Indonesian perspective, whether it is needed or not, I think Indonesia already have some laws that equal treatment of discrimination and so on, as I mentioned. But if it's need for the concept of misogyny, whether it is needed or not, I think it has to be very careful, because we do not want to create more problem as to put superiority of women itself instead of men. Because that's why I think the lawmakers try to put every person word instead of using some kind of gender. And I think it is still a long consideration to combat the misogyny. Like we have to consider the factors and the elements that could create the hatred toward women in law and regulation, and we have to consider the culture and also the neutrality of the government itself. I think that is the important point. But of course, like Natasha said, if the ultimate purpose is to create more safe environment for women, I think it is a very good point. And I think everyone would agree for that, but we have to be very careful without giving any more discrimination to other groups.
Yeah,
Thank you.
if you try to like protect and you overprotect one group, you actually make it into reverse discrimination, isn't it? And that actually touched on a question I wanted to ask, but I guess you already answered it. The background is that in the UK, I mean, it's not really an Indian or Indonesian perspective, but it's similar situation where there were experts' opinion. The Law Commission actually make a note and saying, making misogyny a hate crime can be more harmful than helpful to both the victims of violence against women and girls, and also to the efforts to tackle hate crime more broadly. So I guess if you want to make something a crime, we're looking at the outcome, and this should be equally, I guess, to women or male victims, right? So I guess, yeah, it's still a long way ahead, and to, let's say, define a more gender specific kind of hate behavior. All right, I have one more questions. So coming from myself, a bit of a social science background, what kind of role do you think schools and employers can play in tackling misogyny? Because you already mentioned like training, right? So how these can be implemented via school, via an employer, and how the government can put into law to enforce, or let's say to tackle the issue from prevention from the beginning. Maybe it will be something interesting from both perspective.
Okay,
Yes.
I can go first,
Yeah,
or
go on,
sorry,
Natasha.
were you going to?
Go on.
Okay, thank you. So that's a really good question, Pia, because I think that will have a huge impact. If we manage to kind of set the base at that level, it will go a long way in protecting the women, and even, I mean, the other genders for that matter, and make it a gender neutral world. Now, India as a country has probably the highest population of young people. And when I say young people, it is within the age group of, say, 10 to 40. And with that kind of population is where one needs to focus and create awareness. Now, this starts with school, that is the grassroots level. Actually, I would say parenting is the grassroots level, and then the next step would be schools. If there are policies, or if there are educational programs which are interactive, by way of which children in an impressionable mind and stage are actually taught the value of respecting somebody's rights, the value of respecting somebody's reputation, what constitutes as hate speech or hate comments. Just these tiny bits, if they're taught in an early age and stage, it'll go a long way. For in a probably a working environment or in schools and colleges, this has to be a more a robust program. In an online world, I think it is very important to concentrate and educate people about the different tools that are offered by online platforms. There are a couple of tools that these platforms offer to immediately report crimes, but I don't think that many women or many other people would know about this. So create that kind of sensitivity. Also create awareness about, in India, like I mentioned, there are a lot of schemes in place that the government has initiated, but they don't know it. They don't know their rights. Statistically speaking, there have been, I think there was over 168 or 170% of increase in online misogyny noticed during the pandemic. So that in itself, and barely any reports. And that in itself shows that majority of the women who faced these comments did not know that there is a way to act upon it. So these sensitization programs and awareness programs at every level and keep getting nuanced would, I think, really work well to tackle the issue in India.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. Well, from the Indonesia perspective, I would say in employment industry, I would say there are some rights that is already protected by the government from Indonesia, one of which like the maternity leave, and then some of the working hours policy for women for doing overworks, for example, and the obligation for the company to provide the transportation and also the meal to ensure that women is protected in that way. Well, actually, some rights has already been executed, like the period leave and so on. But the thing is, if we are talking about rights, it is protected. But if we are talking about the misogyny itself, I think it has not yet been regulated by the government. And that could be one of the recommendations that I mentioned in my presentation, that we have to create a safe and comfort workplace, because usually the women employees get really scared of reporting any prejudice in workplace. And that is one of the loophole, I think, that we have to consider more, and we should have more viewpoint on that. Because for example, I think I would go for the recommendation like we should create the report from the women employees in every company to like doing some kind of questionnaire or something, and then we could analyze whether they feel safe in their workplace or not. And that kind of report could be used as one of the credit scoring for the company for giving the equal protection for the women in the employment. But the companies could also act on the like financial consideration, especially like to accept married female employees. Usually it's still quite a consideration, because the company will provide more support to the women just because the women has already been married or have the children. And I think that kind of thing should be diminished, because we have to see the women as neutral. I mean, as equal as possible. And I think through that point, we have we could not only combat the misogyny, but also by giving the online platform to report. I think that's one of the protection that the government could do towards the employees, women employees in the company.
Thank you. Yeah, for the time's sake, we should conclude here for the first section. But any questions, you are very welcome to come back. And I think after the other two presenters, then we will have Ayu and Natasha back for more questions if you have. So now, please allow me to hand back to Aisha, our host. Thank you, Ayu and Natasha, for your sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Tia. Very interesting discussion. I just noticed that I owe Tia introduction. So if I may, a little bit late, but Tia graduated from Queen Mary University of London with an LLM in Intellectual Property Law in 2013, after obtaining an LLB from Sun Yat-sen University. And after that study, she continued exploring international trade and political economy while completing her master and PhD degrees in international political economy. Currently, Tia works as a senior compliance consultant at Rule Limited, supporting corporate clients on various ethics and compliance-related matters, looking after programs like anti-corruption, due diligence, risk assessments, and investigations and whistleblowing. So once again, thank you, Tia. And now that you're still muted, but then yeah.
No, it's fine. I'm just saying thank you very much, but let's crack on.
Yeah, thank you. So now the next session, we will have another moderator. Dr. Sezen İşçik from Turkey is already here. So if I may also introduce her a little bit. Sezen Kama İşçik is an alumni of Queen Mary University of London, LLM, also in 2013, and of School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, FDPS program in 2012. He was an alumni ambassador of Turkey between 2013 and 2022. And now she is an assistant professor at Istanbul Medeniyet University Law Faculty, Department of Constitutional Law. In 2019, she was a visiting researcher at University of Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne, and then at the same year, she completed her PhD at Marmara University, Istanbul, Department of Public Law. So her published PhD thesis, if I may share, is the Constitutional Overview of European Data Protection Law. Her main research areas are constitutional law, human rights law, and their intersections with digitalization, privacy, and data protection as a human right. Very extensive profile. So Dr. Sejans, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you for the kind introduction and your also Firdausi's and Tia's efforts today endlessly for this event, make it smooth. Thank you once again. Following the first session, I'll be the moderator for the second session, where it will consist of two speakers. I'll try to make this session more sharp and concrete for the time's sake. The first speaker is Ms. Inna Polyakova, who will do presentation about misogyny, media, and law, examining the interplay. And the second one is Mr. Firdausi Firdaus, who will do presentation about the critical analysis of online misogyny from multidisciplinary perspective. Without further ado, now we will begin this presentation session with the first speaker, Ms. Inna Polyakova. Let me introduce her. Ms. Inna Polyakova got LLM degree and yes. Ms. Inna Polyakova got LLM degree from Queen Mary University of London. She is the UK qualified solicitor and Ukraine qualified advocate. Ms. Polyakova is a lawyer with over 12 years, PQE of advising clients on IP and IT, corporate, commercial, and tax legal issues within the top-tier law firms as DLI Piper, Dentons, SV, and Partners. She was also working as a senior legal expert to the EU delegation for Ukraine. And now we are listening you, Inna, about misogyny, media, and law, examining the interplay. You have roughly 15 minutes, and thank you.
Thank you a lot. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's a great pleasure. So I would like to cover misogyny, media, and law, examining the interplay in between different terminology. And I would like also to cover a particular angle in respect of the UK regulations and European regulations in that respect, because I think it may be valuable for our audience. So I will start with the issue of the relationship between misogyny, media, and our legal framework generally, because actually the relationship is quite complex and interconnected, as it was stated before by previous presenters. It involves the way in which media portrays of women and gender roles, and how it can perpetuate or challenge misogynistic attitude and beliefs, and how legal systems react to that and reflect that and shape social norms and values regarding gender equality. Media representations play a crucial role in shaping public perception and attitude towards women, and unfortunately, media has historically perpetuated harmful stereotypes and objectivation of women, reinforcing the idea that they are primarily valued for their physical appearance and reinforcing gender inequality. For example, advertisement and entertainment media often depict women as sexual objects and portray them in subordinate roles, which can contribute to the normalization of misogyny as such. Such representations can reinforce discriminatory beliefs and attitudes, leading to real-world consequences such as undervaluing women contributions and enforcing gender-based violence as such, and marginalization of women in various areas of life. And media representations can also influence public opinion about gender-based violence and discrimination. which in turn affects the development and implementation of legal frameworks as such. Because biased portraits of women in media can undermine the credibility of victims who come forward in different legal aspects. This can create a hostile environment for survivors and discourage them from seeking justice, ultimately impeding progress in equal society. Legal frameworks, on the other hand, play a critical role in establishing equality, in establishing social norms and standards. Law and regulations are meant to protect individuals from discrimination, violence, and other forms of harms. Although being a bit like biased, we should find a way how legal system can work in that environment. So, for instance, law related to property rights, employment, and family matters have often disadvantaged women historically in past. And then it's only changed, and it was a huge progress, but it was a long process. As such, these legal frameworks can therefore change and can perpetuate systematic discrimination at the moment and can change in future. There are also significant advancements in many legal systems right now, and I will cover that a bit later on in my presentation, because we already see in numerous countries laws against sexual harassment, domestic violence, discrimination, which had been enacted and strengthened in many countries. These legal reforms are often influenced by social movements and increased awareness about harmful impact of misogyny. And media play a crucial role in that process by amplifying voices, raising awareness, and encouraging discussions that challenge misogynistic beliefs and practices. Because, for example, in recent years, Me Too movement made significant change in that respect, and other actually movements. The work of NGOs in that respect is very crucial. Different ethical aspects of that is also crucial. Through public discourage and media exposure, numerous public movements, they have pushed for changes in legal framework for better protected and empowered women. Therefore, interplay is quite significant one. So misogyny in media, misogyny mostly represented as prejudice or discrimination against women, and we have like different definitions actually in either in legislation or even like in theory. So and it's also an issue because we don't have like a unified approach around different countries, even like in Europe, despite it's European Union, we don't have like an unanimous like view on what is misogyny as such, either as a legal definition or even like a normal definition, how we use that in language. So the portrait of women in media is quite oppressive, and we can see normally that women are used as like object to provide particular influence on people. So present examples of media is like harmful stereotypes, objectivation, and gender-based violence against women. So reinforcement of gender stereotypes, body images issues, and self-esteem, normalization of violence against women, it's all what we see, and it's an impact of media representations. So media is crucial because media is actually a vehicle which can either like reinforce that or can influence in the other way, because when media is publishing particular materials on how gender equality is crucial, then it's reinforcing another loop of this particular issue. So legal framework is actually what I want to cover, because I would like to compare how right now misogyny is defined in different jurisdictions or not defined, and what kind of movement we have in that respect. So for example, in Eastern Europe, so Poland does not have specific legal definition. However, the country has laws to address gender-based discrimination and violence against women, such as Act on Counteracting Domestic Violence and Act on Equal Treatment. Hungary also does not have a specific legal definition. However, the country has laws in place that address gender equality and discrimination, including the Act on Equal Treatment and Criminal Code, which includes provision against violence and harassment. Czech Republic. Czech Republic does not have a specific legal definition of misogyny. However, the country has laws that address gender equality and discrimination, like Anti-Discrimination Act, and also like Criminal Code, which covers some provisions in respect of violence and harassment. Ukraine, the same situation. We don't have like specific legislation, but we have some provisions in Criminal Code, and we have some particular laws which tackle equality and discrimination as such. United Kingdom does not have specific legal definition either. However, there are kind of laws and legislation in place to protect against gender-based discrimination. What is interesting is like Equality Act 2010, legislation prohibits discrimination based on like various protected characteristics, including gender. Sexual Offensive Act 2003 and Domestic Abuse Act 2021. What is crucial, it's like very fresh legislation. It's very recent law that aims to improve the legal framework around domestic abuse, including recognition of specific offense and extending protection to victims. It's worth noting that some cities in the UK, such as Nottingham, have implemented measures to record and address incidents of misogyny as a form of hate crime, although this is obviously not like legislation. However, there are some steps to regulate that. So therefore, all this legal framework, it caused some particular impact on how legal implications evolve. So challenges in progress. We obviously have freedom of speech and artistic expression, so it's impossible to prohibit that completely. We have inconsistent enforcement around different jurisdictions and around different countries, so therefore it's quite tricky how that can be implemented and enforced. And present examples of progress made in recent years show us that it's quite a difficult question to tackle, again, because of we are balancing between freedom of speech and we are balancing between like protection of women. So future direction and conclusions. So media literacy programs are probably will be like the best option to move forward. Collaborative efforts among different authorities and among different organizations, and policy reforms and some policy and public reforms as such. So it's probably how that will evolve in the next future. So it was quite brief, but hopefully I covered like everything from perspective of the UK regulation and Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. Thank you. Actually, as we know, you don't have enough time. So now we are going through question and answer session. And please feel free to ask questions. She has to left, as I mentioned. And if you have any questions, please, you can ask now for Ina. Maybe yes,
because
please, Mr. Firdausi.
writing is difficult than speaking for me. So my question is, I was wondering if there is a progress that has been made in Ukraine in combating online misogyny in this past decade, 2 decades, yeah? Because especially because you have a practical experience as a lawyer in ICT law, I was wondering if such thing exists or actually is status quo the same, like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, and now it's the same. If not, then what actually needs to be done? I know that currently you are at war, so maybe this is kind of like the not the priority, but maybe you can also answer from the UK jurisdiction, because in UK misogyny is considered is very divisive issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we don't have like very huge progress, I would say, in Ukraine, because it's just merely a question of like a couple of regulations in respect of harassment, because harassment it had been like changed obviously, and like we had regulation implemented in that respect. But what interesting, what I have stressed again, like in respect of the UK, so they are implementing some particular changes and they concern. So even like this Act 2029, it's approval that they are taking step and they're considering that quite heavily, and they are implementing particular legal regulations in that respect. So what's more interesting that it's not in the UK a matter of legal regulations, it's also a matter of just general policies, general guidelines. And we think as lawyers, like it's not crucial, but it is actually, because it forms like general agenda for future changes. So it's quite crucial. It shouldn't be undermined, like what the point behind this kind of guidelines and policies, because they're crucial and they cause particular influence on that area as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ina. I hope it's enough for Mr. Firdaus. And also, I would like to ask something, Ms. Ina. Your major is related with media, and I would like to ask the difference between online misogyny and traditional misogyny, and especially under the umbrella of the European Convention on Human Rights, freedom of speech, the right to freedom of speech. What are the balancing points for online misogyny? You mentioned about the balancing between freedom of speech and the online content regulation. And what are the balancing points for this online misogyny issue? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Thank you a lot for the question. So yeah, so online misogyny take place in virtual environments such as social media platforms or like forums or like comment sections, whereas offline it's obviously like taking place in physical worlds. It's kind of difficult to compare right now. I mean, like in terms like it's kind of different means of communication and like means how it influences. However, what's interesting that we have regulation in respect of media, and we have regulated the use of media platform, and we have regulations in terms of personal data. We have regulations in terms of data as such. So yeah, so it's kind of a different scale and reach for online misogyny. And what's interesting, like misogynistic messages can be disseminated widely, and like it's very and can change the approach how legislation is react on that. So online misogyny often takes in the form of non-physical aggression, yeah, but it can be traced. It's important to know that online misogyny is not disconnected from offline misogyny, but attitudes and beliefs, yeah, they are different. So addressing online misogyny requires multi-phased approach, and it's not yet covered so much in legislation, although there are some policies, obviously. And again, like I would stress that it's quite crucial to tackle these issues even through policies, even through like soft law, not like hard law, because later on maybe it will end up in proper legislation. It's essential to foster online environment and promote respect and inclusivity and gender equality. However, like in terms of legal framework, it's still weak. And again, it's very difficult to judge right now whether it's proper or not, because it's normal probably process of development of any legislation, because it starts from like soft law, then it just becoming like more and more legislative, and only then it end up being proper legislation.
Thank you, Ina. And is there any question for Ina? Ina, again, may I have one question more?
Yeah, sure.
This is my last question. You pointed out gender equality also. What are the differences, gender equality, sexism, and misogyny in the online content under the perspective of the European Court of Human Rights? Or from your point of view, what are the differences in the online content of sexism, misogyny, and gender equality? How it is decided to keep under the umbrella of it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you a lot for your question. And it's interesting because again, like we're getting back to that question that there is no legal definition, and it's kind of problem. It's kind of problem. Maybe it's not, again, because when we have definition, then we narrow down everything to that definition. So it can be also a problem. So that's why it takes long to define. But for right now, it's only like kind of opinion. So we have online comments, threats. We have like cyberbullying, which is like kind of different point of angle for misogyny compared to different definitions we have right now, and some of them are already defined in legislation. So it's kind of angle, it's a kind of like expression way of to express that and way of doing that. So it would kind of make a difference. But again, we don't have like proper definition, so no one can just draw the line and tell that that is one and that is two. So that is defined in that way and or another way. So again, like whether we need that definition right now, probably we need, but just it's a matter of time, a matter of tailoring down, because like all is evolving, and we see like how it's evolving progress in terms of like defining, in terms of social media, how they're changing. So it's probably a matter of time.
Thank you, Ina. Is there any questions for Ina? Once again, thank you. And now we are continue with second speaker, who is Mr. Firdaus. And he will do presentation about the critical analysis of online misogyny from the multidisciplinary perspective, which is really hardcore, because it is really hard to have a look this issue in terms of the multidisciplinary perspective. And I'm really curious about my last question to Firdaus also. I'm really curious about the misogyny, sexism, and gender equality in terms of the multidisciplinary perspective. And now I would like to introduce him to you. Mr. Firdaus is an alumni of CCLS, Queen Mary University of London, with an LLM in Computer and Communications Law, and he graduated in 2013. Currently, he is a PhD student and researcher in ICT law at the University of Barcelona. Before his PhD studies at the University of Barcelona began, Firdausi was lecturer in information communications technology law modules at UNPAD, Indonesia, such as cyber law, media law, telecommunications law, case study on law and technology, and e-commerce law. Firdausi was involved in some organizations in the ICT area in local and global, such as Mastel, ISOC, ICT, LSA. He was lead country of Queen Mary University of London Alumni Ambassador Indonesia between 2014-2022. Lastly, and currently, Firdausi is a co-lead chapter of CCLS, Queen Mary University of London, Indonesia. And now we are listening to you, Firdausi, about the critical analysis of online misogyny from multidisciplinary perspective. You have roughly 15 minutes, and thank you.
Tess, can you see my screen, Dr. Sezen? Can you see my screen, Dr. Sezen? Hello.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, yes, we can see Firdausi.
Okay. Thank you for your very positive introduction about me. I hope I can live with it. Yeah, keep up with it. I have 15 minutes for 55 pages, which is not possible, so I will just cherry pick. But this presentation will be divided into several sessions that some already covered by the 3 previous speakers. But maybe for the background, I will start to watching misogyny and so on and so forth. I often come back from the fun stuff. So it reminds me when I watched Prof. Marston, Wonder Woman. This film is from 2017. So this professor is a psychologist, is the one who created Wonder Woman. And one of the interesting quotation that I found from this movie. This is like movie based on true story, yeah, not fictional. A path to peace is not through finance or politics, but it is to solve the problems of men's heart. And men's mind are far too limited. That's why we need women. So just from this, although some people probably will contradict this, yeah, it's really true that men needs women, then actually women also needs women. So there is no any enough reason actually for men to look down on women and vice versa too. So misogyny definitely cannot be justified, yeah, and although it can be understand why it's happened, but it cannot be justified, yeah, because every human, regardless the gender, have the same right, as it proved by the presence of human rights, yeah. And actually, in these days where people are more populated and then the circulation of economic situation which is not good, so I think it really needs the role of both genders, men and women. Yeah, we cannot rely like during the Stone Age era where probably just need men to do anything. And then, of course, this misogyny is something that will create a unsafe environment to everybody, not just to women, but actually also can lead towards women too. As we all know that there are feminist movement is happened because how that men treat women. But then when feminists becoming more success, their movement becoming more success, then men try to strike back. What I mean men here is the radical one, where they often say men movement and so on and so forth. So in any ways, misogyny is not good, especially in this kind of situation like now from the pandemic and now economic crisis in many places around the world. Yeah. The problem with misogyny, even though we live in the globalization, in global era, and internet is supposed to connect people and make people more open, but why still happen? Is because misogyny is something that deep-rooted cultural in society beliefs, wherever they come from. From my personal experience, I found it surprised that I found similar patterns of how my fellow gender, whether male, whether man, wherever they come from or wherever their ideology, they kind of like the misogynist activity or behavior is still there, even in my generation. Yeah, even though I believe that now these days, I think men are more. It should be more, not more honest, but also in online mode. Actually, people are more. Actually, sometimes more brave than in real life. This is what makes online misogyny can be more problematic than in the offline. Of course, systemic misogyny is something that because it's deep-rooted, so it's already embedded in the system. Yeah, and the presence of online platform apparently rather than helping actually make it worse to some extent. Yeah, and this is done because it's not followed by the education itself. Yeah. So what makes online misogyny spread? Yeah, of course, the more people use social media in every part around the world, yeah, then people will start to follow what is the trend in online social media. Yeah, for example, there are some public figure that promote misogyny and they're proud with it. For example, like Andrew Tate, yeah. And sometimes people still find information that they find from the internet is positive, or they just probably just being naive at accepting what's there they found in the internet. So lack of media literacy. So education in gender equality. I think based on my personal experience, I also have not really experienced education in gender equality properly. Yeah, but I think it's just by personal experience that I think how we should treat women and so on and so forth. Yeah. And especially after I interact with people from different part of the world with different gender, different ideology and so on, then it's just getting better. So I think education definitely. And this is probably nudity and pornography. Yeah, because while for some people already understand that nudity and pornography is just for entertainment, probably is also part of freedom expression. Apparently, this is a tool that is very play significant role to make or people treat women in bad ways, yeah, because it's often nudity and pornography in particular make a scene like sex scene that I'm pretty sure everybody here is taking. Yeah, they look like make it's not only doable but it's approved, yeah, when it's not, right? So sometimes this is, I think, related with the lack of media literacy again. Yeah. So how to solve online misogyny? When we talk about solution, there are probably many, yeah, from education. So for the victims, when we found the victims, yeah, because we do not know what the impact of the victims, yeah, once they become the victim of misogyny, especially online misogyny, it might lead to the suicide, yeah, or maybe nothing for those who are probably are kind of numb. Yeah, if I cannot say strong, sometimes people are just being numb, whatever they say. And also, maybe it's time to balance gender equality issue. Yeah, so we focus on women. Yes, that's definitely ongoing issue now and in the future. But then actually, some men also feel like they're being discriminated. Yeah. So this is also where I think it's not to justify misogyny. It's okay to do it, but it just means that something is not right. Yeah. For in particular from the government aspect, yeah. Why this has happened? Why there is a movement that misogyny in the era where girls should be more open. Yeah. And of course, this is not something that it should be done nationally. Yeah, it should be done regionally. It should be done actually globally and very multi-stakeholder. Beside, of course, multidisciplinary. Inadequate of law in combat online misogyny general or online misogyny is a lack of specific legal provision. As we know that when you create a law to specific, sometimes it's also making it more difficult to enforce, and probably it will also taking some of your people's right. So this is also the problem. And sometimes where law, what it's written in the law is cannot be enforced easily too. Yeah. And given how developed the technology is so advanced and very fast compared to the development of the law itself, it's often the law have limited to be enforced because of the limited of the scope of the law itself. Societal attitudes and norms. This is something that require time to this, for people to change their mindset, the way of thinking, their lifestyle. It needs time. It's not something you can change just in one day, 1 month, year. Yeah. And because the nature of online misogyny is kind of like how the cybercrime it works. It works multi border. I mean, it can happen in everywhere around the world because virtual realm is borderless. Yeah. So yeah, there are plenty that I will not mention by one. Yeah. So when we talk about the general law and then we talk about cyber law and media law, this is the key issue of the area of law in combating misogyny. Yeah. First is the advance of the technology. This is like inevitable. Yeah. And legal complexity, as we know that from learning the theory and then when we implement it in the real life, it's even becoming difficult. Yeah. And yet the crime, yeah, cyber crime that happens after online misogyny takes place, yeah, it happens very fast. You can just type it, yeah, and the impact you just never know how much the damage can be. And then it's of course about the balancing free speech, yeah. So if you will create, for example, a regulation that actually prohibit people to say this, and blah blah blah, and it's too specific, probably in the process it will also limit the free speech as well. So this is also another problem. Then from media aspect, yeah, this freedom of expression, media law definitely needs to update their legal framework. Yeah, and another thing is the burden of proof in media law. Yeah, the proof to establish the certain content constitute misogyny. Yeah, it can be very challenging. Yeah, because for the effort that we need to put there to proving the in-text, context, and specific harm caused by misogynist content, it can take more time. Again, enforcing things is difficult. Yeah. Media ownership and control, because when we're talking about development technology and we're talking about media, it's also related with business. So what people think about business sometimes is lack of ethical. Yeah, so media ownership and control, this is also play a role on how to combat online misogyny. The problem is, what is the mindset of the owner of the media? Yeah, if they are such a misogynist, yeah, then that's not gonna work. How the combating online misogyny? That's just one example. Then after we are talking about the area of law, then we also need to see from the different disciplinary approach. There are several disciplinary approach, like criminology. Yeah, criminology, as we all know, is a very useful in related, for example, to combat crimes itself. And this is also related with the cybercrime, and then the action that conducted by misogyny, it might lead to cyber crimes. Yeah, for example, like cyber stalking, cyber harassment, revenge porn, and hate speech. Yeah, and then learning criminology, yeah, in order to combating online misogyny can also means we can prevent the crime to be happen. Developing prevention program that target individuals who are at risk, yeah, of engaging in online misogynistic. And of course, when it's happened already, we can tackle to give the victim support. Yeah. And then we also can do risk assessment on how the strategy that has been done by the platforms or by the institution or by the government in the law, for example, by using regulatory impact assessment. We know how good or bad the law is, or that needs to be changed or need to be made, and focus on this related with combating online misogyny. This is just the example. And the other is we are talking after criminology. We are also talking about sociology, psychology first. Without that, actually, this psychology is a very one of the basic things on how to combat online misogyny, because everything is start from self, right? Ourselves. So if everybody knows, yeah, psychology is a subject where emphasize development on empathy and perspective, talking skills, where we can understand people. So this one can apply both, can apply to women, what impact happened with the misogyny, for misogyny to the woman when it happened, and what makes, for example, misogyny is conducted by men, yeah, toward misogyny, toward women. So these can change attitude and beliefs as well. That's the impact that psychology can take place. It's also can addressing individuals and group dynamically, because from time to time, the misogyny might increase, might decrease. So psychology can also examine the individual and group dynamics that contribute to online misogyny. And then coping strategies. This is kind of like a skill on how to be resilient when you're facing the online misogynies that happen to yourself by conducting by others. Yeah. So, or how to prevent yourself from being the victim. Like maybe you become feeling numb, whatever it would say, like, no worries, I don't care. This is just rubbish, yeah, for example. Because there is a impact from people when they become a victim or they misogynistic. They might feel trauma, yeah, for example. So in overall, psychology can provide valuable insight and approaches to combat online misogyny by understanding the psychological factors that and developing intervention that address individual attitudes, belief, behavior. Other is sociology. Sociology, definitely we look more rather than focus on one person like psychology or the motive like criminology. We are focusing more on the society. I will just go to the overall. So society can provide valuable insight and approaches to combat online misogyny by examining the social cultural structural power dynamics that contribute to its perpetuation and informing strategies for prevention, intervention, and social change. And then we have anthropology. This is a very cultural stuff. Field that study that examine human culture, society, behaviors can over, for example, like cultural analysis, ethnographic. So because misogyny is something that deeply rooted in the society, actually, even unconsciously. Then definitely anthropology is a subject that actually should play a key role to combat online misogyny. Because and it will not takes a short time to do it. Because for people to mindset, their behavior is not just something like in the blink of an eye. I think if you learn
Dear
history,
Firdausi, you have 5 minutes more.
Okay.
Because it's already 15 minutes.
Okay. Then after anthropology is communication studies. Without the communication studies, very related with the social media. With how we communicate, how from person to person, group to groups, group to person, and how the platforms, for example, media representation. So without doubt that media literacy and digital citizenship is something that can promote that we know the border when misogyny is happen, when misogyny is not happen, because again, this is kind of how to make things familiar, right? Because it needs process, and in order for people to familiar with the change of mindset and the culture, people need to be familiar with, and then communications studies definitely play a key role in this. So I think let's just go to the conclusion. In conclusion, misogyny is still happening because it's deeply rooted and systemic in the society. Therefore, it requires multi-stakeholder approach and multidisciplinary approach, regional global approach, as it will not be solved in night, 1 month, 1 year, not even in 2 years. Then development of technology should always follow with protocol to protect people from being the victim of this and misogyny, including. And I think we should also be aware that the emerging technology that currently we often hear about it, like artificial intelligence, is highly risk, could create more issue than when just the internet without artificial intelligence. So I think the problem is will becoming worse, if we are not aware. I mean, even if we are aware, probably we're already late, but we need to mitigate or prevent then it's becoming worse. So I think it is a homework for everybody, not just me, not just some people below, but also everybody, just everybody. Because everything is start from the small scope, from the family, how you educate people, how you educate family, and so on. Because of time, I cannot speak like more minutes than now. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Okay, I will give it back to Seth. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Firdausi. It is really hard debate on it, and your perspective was multilateral approach, which is really hard to combine with all the approaches. And now we are going through the question and answer sessions. And do you have any questions for Mr. Firdausi? And after him, also you can ask for the first session if you like. And do you have any questions for Mr. Firdaus? Okay, may I ask any questions for you, Mr. Firdausi? I would like to ask actually about your solutions, because you told us that it won't be solved in one night, 1 month, 1 year. But why do you believe that law is inadequate to combat misogyny? And if law cannot do it, how we combat with this ongoing issue? And what is your solution for it? And how many years we need? I believe, actually, I believe that it must be solved as soon as possible. But what is your point of view? Thank you.
I say that it's not because I'm being pessimistic, but humans are just such a complex creature, and the more people that actually live in this world, then the more problem that we need to tackle, right? I think we already experienced by now, right? And the problem with the law is, even though ideally, law as a social engineer tool, based on risk theory, it should be a good foundation to make society behave in such a certain model, but in reality, it will take time. Yeah. If we look back at how the constitution of each of our country where we come from, that's really makes us to be a certain character in general. Yeah, like usually we cannot generalize people, but we can make the tendency of people from Asia, it's like this. The tendency of people from Turkey is like this. From China, it's like that's because of it. But how people behave in that matters, is because after such time, it's not something that you can create in 1 year, right? And this misogyny is something that already happened, like even before our ancestor is even live in this. There are many centuries that man already becomes so superior and treating women so inferior. Yeah. So for us to just change, it really needs to happen gradually, maybe in the process, but I don't know how long. Yeah. The question on how long is a Nostradamus question. You cannot predict it, or it might be worse because I don't know. I think I suppose that internationally people should be more open-minded. Than what happened now is not open-minded. Some people even more close-minded like before, right? So, but I think the good solution is always come with the small scope. It's from the family, how their parents, how their husband and how the wives, treating each other with respect, that they know they help each other. So one is not too extreme feminist and one is not too men's rights. That's because everybody needs to help each other, and this should be done by family in a working environment that regardless your gender, or even actually misogyny sometimes not limiting on gender. It can make to lead to the race or certain ideology and so on. So the inclusivity view of thing is something that it should be introduced since the beginning of your life, since the small scope of your environment. That's a family, school, work, but it will take time because law and so on can reach, can reach the institution, can reach the family to act in accordance. But in the end, law is just a piece of papers. In the end, is us, the human, that needs to start it. And it's everything should start from the small before we start from the big one. And of course, the public figure and people who represent the government, for example, should be the good example rather than actually promoting misogyny. That's the example. I think that's my answer. I will not make more essay than this. Thank you.
Thank you, Firdausi. Actually, you are right. It's coming from the early childhood, actually, the understanding of the gender equality. I personally believe with that also. And is there any questions for him? If not, I have one more. actually. Firdausi, you pointed out globalization, and also we talked about the localization about this issue. What are the pros and cons of globalization of misogyny, and how it affects online misogyny? Because you are mentioned local understanding of gender issues are different than each other, but at the same time, this is a global problem. How can globalization affect? What are the pros and cons?
So the problem is because of the internet. The internet access is borderless, yet people learn originally about their culture in their real life, yeah, in where they come from, right? So this is sometimes an education from the early, and then I mean in the family or even in the school are not ready, often is not ready. The problem why we create this event is because since the pandemic, actually the trend of misogyny is increasing, yeah, because there are people that actually find their popularity because they're promoting this misogyny content. So this is the problem, because people often think like this, when it's become when a public figure doing things, then it means it's cool stuff, yeah? And it's happened, especially maybe not us who are already quite adult, but this is actually the problem is lies to the people who are seeking the identity, usually the teenagers. This is why the increasing of the misogyny. It's conducted by the teenagers, yeah. So this is why it's becoming concern, because it means that if we do not solve this issue or actually reduce this issue to not be bigger than it should be, then we are in danger to make the next generation to be less educated than our generation, because they already fit in with the bad information to be misogynist, for example. So that's why we need work in global. We need to work in global. For example, as regionally, for example, in my region, ASEAN, what should they do? Code of conduct, and then probably in Europe, they already done something. I haven't checked about what has been done by European Union, for example, where when they create regulation and so on, it will be implemented by the members. So I think from start, yeah, by the government, it should be done by regional, because the regional usually they can have more similar culture. For example, between Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. Yeah, we do not really speak the same languages, but we kind of still share similar culture. So when we have kind of the same standard on doing things, regulate things, yeah, then it might make us are on the same page when we are tackling something. In this case, tackling misogyny. And I think in other regions should be like that too. Even if other regional institution, yeah, it's not like, for example, as structural like European Union. Like even ASEAN, we are not as influential as European Union in Europe, right? We often cannot force the member of ASEAN to do things. Yeah? Look at what happened in Myanmar, for example. Yeah? We cannot like make them, hey, you stop, don't attack your citizens. So this is why this is a local issue, but yet it's global because of internet. Yeah, but it can be done in the government level, is in the regional as a starter. But then in the society, via multi-stakeholder, yeah, whether academia, whether business entity, this also problem. Many things is because business entity, they often think more from the profit oriented rather than maybe ethically, socially, and so on and so forth. But this is why multi-stakeholder is important, the role on how to combat the misogyny. And about the cultural stuff, yeah, sometimes it's become the problem. For example, in certain, like in Asia, like us, where patriarchy, yes, it will take some time, but I see that people from different generation, they might have different view about women. For example, my generation, me, for example, comparing with my father and then my grandma, it's different, right? It's, you can see on how men getting married or having relation with a woman in different generations. It's different, right? It also means that actually how we see women is also means different from different generation. The problem is when there is someone who disrupted, yeah, to make it worse, like this misogynist character, like Andrew Tate, for example, for fame because of this misogynic content, then this is the problem. That's, I think, where the law need to respond quickly. Yeah. But it should not limit people to express different view. Yeah. That's also what happened with the men's right movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Firdausi. Is there any questions? Thank you. Thank you for today with being us. And thank you, Ayesha, Firdausi, and Tia, first of all. And also, I would like to thank all the speakers for these detailed and fruitful presentations, and all attendees for the questions, and of course, their patience. It seems that the subject of misogyny will both become more and more popular, and will continue to be the focus of discussions in all geographies. All countries are trying to determine their priorities of on misogyny and handle their legal responses on it. Today, in these discussions, we have learned different national, international responses on it, and not in terms of law, but also in terms of the multi-layered perspective. It is certainly at the heart of sociology, religion, and it is heart in the law, and it should be dealt with their interrogation, I believe that. And thank you for your patience and attendance today. And now Ayesha will continue for the conclusion. Thank you.
Aisha, you're mute. Still no voice. You're mute now, Aisha.
So I think there's a technical glitch.
Yeah, it's working now. But you're we can't hear you, Aisha.
Aisha.
Aisha, it was okay, but now
it's okay. Now it's not okay anymore. Again. Test. Try test first.
it's not.
Not working? One minute to sort out.
We have technical problems, and Aisha is writing down to the chat. If you want, I can read her. Okay, thank you, Aisha. On behalf of the CCLS Indonesia, India, and Turkey, I thank you all your kind attendance and participations today. See you in our next event, and stay tuned.
Thank you.